Hey, Charles.
Hi, David.
It's the end of the week.
Yes, it is.
All right. So today we are going to talk about apparel supply chain. So what's the deal with?
Love it.
What's the deal with those supply chain? And we'll bring a few fun facts. But most of us, when we think about fashion, we think about what we're going to wear, what we might buy for the next season, but rarely will we go, we don't think about it at all, which is often the case for me. And but we rarely talk about or think about what is the behind the scenes and how all of this happens. So, fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the fact number one is that whatever you'll be buying next summer, so summer 2026, is already being planned, right?
And it's finished. The planning's done.
The planning's done. The
it's
inventory
being manufactured right now.
Yeah. Which is, so we're talking, 9 months. So the planning would have started even, you're right, earlier. So what's the biggest, why does it have to be so long? Why are they building that inventory 9 months in advance?
Well, it's really interesting. The supply chain for the apparel industry in this day and age is a very long one. As you said, the planning began months ago, and probably final designs were submitted summer 2025 for the summer of 2026, and manufacturing began in the summer of 2025, a full year ahead, maybe some longer, maybe a little bit shorter, but let's just... And it just has to do with the incredibly complicated job of getting a piece of clothing together in terms of where the fabric comes from, where all the buttons and threads and zippers and all that comes from. It's actually probably coming from multiple different countries. To then be assembled in a plant that will be far from North America, and it then has to travel on a boat, and it has to land well before the season begins. And I think we're going to get into that in a second, but that's the first thing. And I will say this: it reminds me of a very famous monologue in that Devil Wears Prada movie from Meryl Streep, where she sort of, I don't know who the star of that movie is, but the star of the movie, she's like, she's above fashion, she's an intellectual, and Meryl Streep sort of rips into her and says, you think that blue sweater was chosen by you as you dug it out of a bargain bin at a Macy's. But actually, that blue is cerulean blue, and it was first presented in a collection years ago. And it's really interesting because if you think about that, the supply chain, the concepts begin with fashion shows that were done 2 years ago, that then trickle down to the mass market, because the mass market takes its cues from high fashion and then sort of translates those ideas into fashion. So what's hot in summer of 2026 is probably something that was dreamt of in summer of 2024. Then it goes from the haute couture down to regular market. So it's a very long planning cycle, which also means one of the great challenges is you're never sure what is really going to hit, but you are making that bet on your inventory 12 months before you get to discover what is going to work and not.
Yeah, so very, very long and kind of fed to the masses, but not everything will sell, and that brings other challenges we'll talk about later. And so that supply chain, not only is it long, but it's also doesn't have the steadiness that we would see in other supply chains, grocery being a good example, where goods just kind of flow through that chain in a fairly fairly stable way. Yes, SKUs depending on season will change, but other than that, it's pretty steady. In this supply chain, it's more of a boom and bust where peaks and valleys are the norm throughout the year. So,
from a warehousing perspective, the way the apparel industry works is based on season, and you're going through kind of, let's say, I didn't think about this in advance, so I'm going to say it's 4 steps, right? So you start with inventory buildup. Okay, and this is actually it's Canadian Thanksgiving this weekend, and American Thanksgiving will come up in a couple of months. Now, one of the things most people probably will figure out quickly is pretty common sense. You don't kill and
turkeys.
Butcher 8 million turkeys in Canada the week before Canadian Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
You're building up an inventory of frozen turkeys over time because you just cannot farm that way. Well, the concept is very similar here. You are going to start a season. Since we picked summer of 2026, let's stick with that. You're going to build up the inventory in your warehouse over months, a long period. Otherwise, the manufacturing would become insanely expensive because you're trying to create a massive output over a very short amount of time instead of a continuous flow. So, the Canadian or the American warehouse, the North American warehouse, is receiving containers of inventory as the manufacturing output is generated. And so you're building up that inventory over months. And that's step 1. Once you have that inventory, when the stores are ready to switch seasons, there's a massive distribution. Almost 70% of that inventory buildup is getting distributed to the stores.
Not even stored in the warehouse.
Right.
Well, it could be stored or flow through.
Well, once that buildup's done and you're ready for the new season, it's like 2/3 of it is going out to the stores so that when you wake up and go to the mall on that Monday morning, the first day of the season or whatever, because it won't be on a weekend that first day will happen. You wake up and spring collection's gone and summer collection's in. And so you have to do a huge distribution. Once you've done that, you've got that 30% left. And that is to be shipped out to the stores in sort of onesie-twosie fashion to replenish and react to where sales are hot. Because that first initial that boom you were talking about, that is allocated based on a projection of what we think the sales are going to be. You hold back 30% so that you can balance out, keep stores, stocked, and also react to maybe something's doing a little bit better in New York and not as well in Ohio, vice versa. So I said it was 4 steps. It was really just 3, although we can talk about a 4th one, which is what happens when the stuff comes back, because not everything is going to sell. And especially in a wholesale environment, you can often wholesale, meaning I am a apparel manufacturer, apparel distributor, and I'm selling into other retailers like a department store, and I've agreed to take back what hasn't sold, and that would be, the full circle of the life cycle. But that's the boom and bust.
And my comment about maybe not even being stored in the DC is really specific to some, mostly retailers that have that control most of the supply chain, where in order to deal with warehouse capacity, they may be able to have cases coming off the line that are store ready. Yeah. But that's specific not every apparel manufacturer is able to do that.
Actually, that's a really interesting one that maybe people don't know, but there's 2 things to that. One, to make replenishment at the store level, because, and this is an old quote, but it still applies for most of the world, 50% of all the costs of a supply chain happen in the last 100 feet of the supply chain. So store replenishment is a massively expensive part of a supply chain. And so one way to gain some efficiency is to create what we call store ready or store friendly packages, which might be, for example, a style in an assortment of sizes and colors that you can literally pull out of the box and hang, because they come with the hangers, they come tagged with price tags. That's something that may be an inventory buildup scenario that you then release. But as David said, it could also be something that flows through. But the things that flow through are what we would call like basics or the timeless parts of our clothing.
White t-shirts.
White t-shirts.
Yeah.
White t-shirts, socks, underwear, things that everyone buys all the time.
Regardless
where
of-
once it becomes sort of a regular consumption pattern, then you can run your business like that.
So speaking about warehouse capacity, clothing will vary greatly in size depending. Well, here in Canada, and anywhere there's
really.
snow. Yeah,
In Texas, you're not dressed in summer the way you're dressed in winter.
fair. Fair. You're right.
I was thinking about that point, and it's way more extreme here in Canada. But
Where boots and coats have a cubic volume much greater, has volume much greater than dresses and shorts.
yeah, a summer inventory in volume takes up much less space in a warehouse than a winter inventory, and that is true unless you're on the equator.
Correct.
Anytime you have variability in temperature in the seasons, a sweater is worse than a t-shirt, a winter jacket is worse than a rain jacket or whatever. And so, we always design for the winter season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The French expression, which is you don't design a church for Easter, well, it's actually the opposite here. You actually need to be able to take on the absolute maximum in volume that's going to go through your facility at every part, whether it's the staging on the dock, the storage, the conveyors, and so on and so forth, which creates the appearance of underutilized capacity for parts in between seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, the apparel warehouses of North America they look skimpy. But next summer, I should say, as they're building up their winter inventory, that's the test of whether they've got the capacity they need or not.
Yeah.
Or they go into outside storage or whatever, but that's always a pain.
And so talking about capacity leads to handling, and again, the apparel has a very unique has unique attributes in the way that goods are handled and stored. So we have two main ways: garments on hangers, or call it flat pack, flat pack, which is basically folded in cases. That also brings significant complexity because most often, or maybe not all the time, but often both handling units could be in the single facility, and they are handled quite differently from the minute they're unloaded to how they are moving throughout the facility and picked. Those two are very different.
Yeah, we have the flat. Well, the flat is really just boxes. Yeah. You wouldn't walk into a warehouse of flat garments and say, "Wow, you'd say this looks like every warehouse you've ever seen." Boxes. It's really hanging garments that are the unique thing, because the hanging garments essentially. We use monorails, and it looks like your dry cleaner, but on an industrial scale. I mean, that's really, really how you'd want to think about it. And actually, it's interesting. The last monorail system that I designed was not even in the apparel industry.
It was in food.
No, it was car parts. So we had a client who I won't say the model and the make, but they manufactured the liners that you would put as your ceiling to the top of your car. So when you sit in, you got that felt liner, and they were manufacturing that and doing a just-in-time delivery to a car manufacturer who actually had really bad planning. So they wanted to be just in time, but in order to achieve that, they had to be the liner manufacturer had to be able to completely swap out the sequence of liners, right? Because the colors are different, the models are different at all the times, and they had almost no room. And we just hung the liners up in the air in a very large monorail system that could then pick and choose from 11 lanes or something like that, so that they could then do that final sequencing to deliver to the
plant.
To the plant.
Nice.
All of that though was 100% apparel design principles, apparel process. Like engineered processes just applied to a car part.
Interesting. And another thing that these operations, these distribution centers have to deal with is what we call value-added services. So many things could be added or where the garments need to be not modified, but pieces, whether it's pricing, security tags.
Yeah.
It's like a mini operation.
RFID chips now.
RFID chips. Yeah, that's true. That happens really towards just before those are being delivered.
I mean, so if we go back to that principle, most expensive part of your supply chain is that last 100 feet or in the store. Think about it that way. The second place to do that work, or I should say that the next better place to do that work is in the warehouse, where you can invest in processes, technology, and things to do this on a mass scale. Of course, the best is to get all that done
at first
overseas at the manufacturing.
Yeah,
but that is an imperfect thing, especially if you're a wholesaler and maybe you've got the same model going to two different department stores as an example, and spring of 2025, you've started finalizing your forecasts for summer 2026, right? And that's a roll up from all the different department stores in this example. And then you get to winter of 2026, and you've maybe want to adjust your allocations, or you actually, when you start getting firm orders, know you have to adjust. Then you're going to have to do, you'll probably do some rework where you are going to make a certain amount of inventory that is, I'm just picking names randomly, Kohl's ready, and you're going to turn it into Macy's ready product.
And you were talking earlier in the context of wholesale that inventory might have to be taken back.
Yeah.
But there's another feature of those supply chain that really has changed the game in terms of return logistics, and it's the direct-to-consumer or e-commerce aspect of sales that I don't know if you're like this, but many consumers would, rather than go into the store to try out, will basically make their home.
No, I never. No, I can't do that.
No, but many will.
Yeah.
Of ordering multiple sizes or multiple colors of the same piece of clothing and then return parts or even significant parts of that order that they've received and delivered at home, which for the retailers and distributors makes
it's very expensive
to deal with.
But really the key to success is make that process very expensive for the customer. I'd rather just buy something, not even try it on, just something that kind of fits. That's how I like to roll. But the other thing about return, so now if we go back to the wholesaler example, but this applies to the retailer too. So let's say there's an end of season, and I'm going to have in my stores a bunch of inventory I did not sell, and it hit. Winter's here. Got to get the winter stuff out. Having some, whatever yellow or pink flowery tops, it just ain't gonna sell.
Stealing space in the store.
When it's a hazy shade of winter. So that's where we have those. We have the liquidation channels, Big Lots or whatever. Those retailers who are the sort of place of last resort to sell, and then we have the outlet stores. And actually, some apparel people will just ship inventory overseas to other markets and try their luck there. And once it's overseas, it's not coming back.
Yeah.
But that is a really important part of your supply chain. You could see, I'm going to make a number up, but it is like order of magnitude. You could have 30% of your warehouse space consumed by
unsold,
out of season, past season, unsellables.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hopefully, I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts, but I hope these insights our listeners appreciate this dive into a supply chain they may or may not know about.
I mean, I think the apparel industry, the apparel supply chain is fascinating. I think warehousing for the apparel industry is fascinating. I would say one little anecdote. I don't know, a couple of years back. So you did your master's degree on RFID, right?
I did.
Right. And you're younger than I am, but let's say we came into
same time.
Our careers roughly at the same time. You came in, I was already working, and RFID was all the rage. Every warehouse had a little RFID tunnel or some,
had to do it.
Token this demonstration to Walmart, because it was Walmart pushing this, that they were doing something about RFID because Walmart said
you have
within
to do it.
7 years, everything's going to be
barcode
RFID.
are dead.
Barcodes are dead. So fast forward 25 years, and barcodes are still alive and well,
thriving,
and that's one of, I think, Walmart's in the supply chain biggest fails was this dramatic declaration that they were absolutely, totally incapable of making happen. However, the RFID chip did not disappear, right? And it was post hysteria and post hype, it found its applications. And I'll tell you this is where I feel like an old man already. I was in a Tommy Hilfiger outlet store, right? Because I like to buy my clothes outlet. I'll wear last year's season without any shame. And I watched this kid, like one of my daughters, 16, 17, walking around the store with this big wand and just doing wanding inventory. And I'm like, well, I know what he's doing, but I just had to confirm it. I'm like, hey, can I just ask you something? What are you doing? And he, like, in his 60s, I'm taking inventory, sir. I said, with the RFID chips? That's right. Oh my God. So, pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Because when I was 16, my friend, Jane McPherson, she worked at Jacob. And once a year, all like 4 or 5 of us had to go to her store. And we had to do a physical inventory count and and it was tedious, but we got a McDonald's lunch and we got like a little bit of money, so it was worth it. And so fast forward from there was there were 30 people in that Jacob store when we did it. You know what I mean?
It was closed.
It was closed for the day to do inventory, and there was 30 people in that store. And you fast forward, that would be I won't even say, but 40 years.
Some years,
not 40, 35 years, let's say. There's a pimply faced kid just waving a big stupid white wand and doing inventory that way. Yeah. Incredible.
With more precision than you did.
100% with more precision. Anyway, so
There you go.
The apparel industry is pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, same to you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.